This
meeting is being recorded.
Okay. All right. Okay. Thanks everyone for joining us. It's Parshas Mishpatim. So this is a very technical parsha. A lot of rules. It goes through a lot of the civil laws of the Torah, and a lot of the issues are very interesting. But a lot of them are also very, very technical because the rabbis interpret all sorts of details of the law here. So the discussion can sort of get a little convoluted. So hopefully this won't get convoluted. All right. What I want to discuss is one of the well-known prohibitions in the Torah this week is ger lo soneh, that you're not allowed to oppress a ger. All right. You're right. This is a famous prohibition that you're not allowed to mistreat a convert. You're not allowed to, let's say the classic type of idea would be to remind someone, a convert, of where they come from, that they weren't a Jew. Now, here's what I want to discuss, okay? Because this word ger, the word convert, is actually an ambiguous word, okay? There's actually two meanings that it could have. There's the way that we use it, ger, which refers to a convert, right? Somebody who was not a Jew and then converted to be a Jew. That in halacha is what we call a ger tzedek. All right, a ger tzedek is a full-fledged convert, so they were not a Jew and then they became a Jew. But there's another type of a ger, okay? There's another meaning to that word, which is a ger toshav. Okay, a ger toshav means a non-Jew who did not become a Jew. They have not converted to Judaism, but they follow certain rules in line with Judaism. All right, what those rules are exactly is a debate in the Gemara. All right, there's some people that hold that they have to follow the 7 mitzvahs, the 7 Noahide commandments. All right, the 7 mitzvahs b'nei Noach. So in order to be a ger toshav, they would have to follow those rules, even though every non-Jew has to follow those rules. But we're talking about someone who specifically accepted upon themselves to follow those 7 rules. All right. Another view is that they don't have to accept all of the 7 rules, but they have to accept not to worship idolatry. All right. And then there's another view that maybe they don't eat non-kosher meats. All right. So they keep some mitzvahs or something. So basically, a ger toshav is as someone who has not converted to Judaism, but they have agreed to follow some of the rules, whatever those exact rules are. But right, again, there's different views in the Gemara, but they've accepted to follow some of the rules that are obligatory on non-Jews. So in halacha, they have a status of a ger toshav, okay, which means that basically they can live in Israel. There's rules. You can't bother them. You can't. You have to respect them in a certain way, right? You have to treat them like fellow citizens in a certain way, even though they have not become a Jew. Now, back in the day, this was a very serious process. They would actually accept this to follow these rules in front of a court, right? So the same way nowadays a non-Jew converts to Judaism in front of an actual court. So in order to become a ger toshav, this sort of non-Jew that's like a citizen of Israel, it's almost like what we would call today citizenship, as opposed to conversion. But the reason for this law is because they obviously didn't want idolaters living in Israel, right? That would have ruined the whole spirit of the kind of community that they were trying to create in the olden days, right? To have idolaters walking around worshiping idolatry, violating the 7 Noahide commandments. So as a result of that, the Torah came up with this middle ground that a non-Jew who doesn't want to convert, but who wants to live in the land of Israel, so they can accept to be a ger toshav in front of the court, and then that will give them some citizenship rights. Now, there's an interesting view, all right, which I'm not going to spend too much time on, but there's a very interesting view. The Maritz Chios, who was a rabbi about 200 years ago, he had some interesting ideas about the world. He believed that we could almost consider all the non-Jews that we live amongst, Europeans, Americans, at this point, those are the non-Jews he knew, but at this point, it's probably all non-Jews, in Asia, Africa, wherever non-Jews are, at this point, they basically follow laws, right? It's very hard to find a society where the people don't follow laws. I'm sure you could find one or two somewhere. Maybe North Korea or something. I don't know. The regular people follow the laws, but I don't know exactly what goes on over there. But in a normal country, there's laws, there's courts, right? There's a rhyme and a reason to what people are doing. You can't just do whatever you want. You can't just kill people or steal from them or we don't have many countries nowadays. Again, I'm sure you could find some, Iran or whatever, but there's not many countries where you can just kill Jews, at the drop of a hat. So as a result of that, the Maritzios believed that all non-Jews effectively nowadays, anyone that comes from a normal country and a normal society, are considered ger toshav. Okay, in other words, we don't have the types of non-Jews that the halacha dealt with in the olden days, which were non-Jews who didn't really have rules. They would kill Jews, right? They were anti-Semitic. We don't really have many of those that we come in contact with, certainly not in America. So the non-Jews in America would be considered a ger toshav, even though they didn't go in front of a Jewish court and accept to follow the rules, right? Because he believed that it's only when you have individuals that are becoming ger toshav, so they need acceptance. But when it's the whole society, when everybody in society is bound by certain rules, so they don't need acceptance of in front of a Jewish court, they're automatically considered a ger toshav. All right, so those are the two meanings of the term ger. It can either mean an actual convert, or it can mean a ger toshav, not an actual convert, but a non-Jew who lives according to the rules of, certain rules of the Torah. Question is, what are we talking about when the Torah says ger lo sona? The Torah says don't oppress a ger. What kind of convert, what kind of ger are we talking about? Okay, so if this was clear cut, I probably wouldn't be discussing this. So you can already tell, right? There's probably a debate over here, and indeed there is a pretty big debate. There's a very wide-ranging debate. What kind of a convert is the Torah talking about when it says, or I shouldn't say convert? What kind of ger is the Torah talking about when it says not to oppress a ger? All right. So the Chinuch, the Sefer HaChinuch, which is an important collection of the mitzvahs, he believes that we are talking about a full-fledged convert. All right, so a regular Jew, right? You walk into shul, you see a regular Jew, a convert. So you're not allowed to remind that person that they were a convert. All right, and that's what the Rambam seems to imply. That's how he seems to rule on this issue. The Rashbam, who's a very important commentator, he also interprets that we're talking about a full-fledged regular convert. And Onkelos, all right, who wrote a very important translation of the Torah into Aramaic, so he translates this as giura, all right, which means a convert. All right, so basically, there's a very strong tradition that sees that the convert in this pasuk is talking about a full-fledged Jewish convert. On the other hand, the Ibn Ezra, all right, who's also a very important commentator, the Ibn Ezra. So he believes that this pasuk is talking about a ger toshav, not a full-fledged convert, a ger toshav, and that's who the Torah is saying not to oppress. And the same view appears also in something called Maseches Gerim, the tractate of Gerim, of converts, and also in the Yerushalmi. So there's some in the Jerusalem Talmud. So there's some early sources that also interpret this pasuk as referring not only to a regular convert, but any convert, even a ger toshav, right? Obviously, it would also seem to refer to a regular convert. But I mean, there's no reason to say that this pasuk wouldn't refer to a regular convert, but it seems to also include a ger toshav, all right? Someone who has not fully converted to Judaism, but they're living in Israel, right? They're away from their home, so they're a foreigner, right? Let's say they're from, I don't know, they're from England or Australia or something, right? And they live in Israel now, and they've agreed to accept the citizenship of the rules of Israel. So such a person, according to this explanation of the Torah, would be included in the prohibition of ger lo sona, not to oppress a ger, all right, meaning a ger toshav. Okay, so very interesting debate over here. Basically, it's a debate between in some ways the poskim, the halachic authorities versus the commentators, right? So I would say the halacha is probably in accordance with the Rambam, that this prohibition specifically refers to a full-fledged Jewish convert, not a ger toshav. But it's always interesting to know, the opposing view, which is the Ibn Ezra, that this pasuk is talking about a ger toshav as well. Now, what I want to try to do right now is I want to show How did the Ibn Ezra come to this interpretation? All right, so I want to show that if we look at the Ibn Ezra, we'll see that the way he arrived at this conclusion is it's not a localized interpretation of this one verse. Okay, so he's not just arriving, he didn't just read the verse and come to his idea. He's interpreting the whole unit of verses around this. All right, so we're going to look at like 4 or 5 verses right now. And the Ibn Ezra is interpreting all of them using one approach, and that approach is going to lead to this conclusion that ger lo sona, don't oppress a ger, refers even to a ger toshav. All right, so it's very interesting to see how he gets here, because it's not just about how you interpret this one word in this one pasuk. It's about how you interpret the whole unit of psukim surrounding it on either end. All right, and it looks like when you first read these psukim, it looks like they're sort of disconnected. All right, because this is in chapter 22. So in verse 18, there's a prohibition against bestiality, being intimate, having relations with an animal. Then there's a prohibition against performing idolatry in verse 19. Okay, then verse 20 is this pasuk of ger lo sona, don't oppress a convert. Okay, and then verse 21 says that you shouldn't oppress a widow or an orphan. Okay, so it looks like these are sort of disconnected. Obviously, the convert and the widow makes sense that they're together because it's saying don't oppress people who are weaker, right? The weak people in society, don't oppress them. But what does not being intimate with an animal, not having relations with an animal, and what does idolatry have to do with these prohibitions? All right, so let's go through the Ibn Ezra, how he interprets these psukim. And we'll see how, according to him, it's all one unit. It's all building on each other, right? Very, very interesting to see how he does this. Okay, so chapter 22, verse 19, the Torah says, Zoveach le'elokim yechram, or I'm sorry, it should be Zoveach la'elohim yechram. All right, if someone sacrifices to God, to Elohim, not the actual God, right, to the idolatrous gods. So if someone sacrifices to an idolatrous god, they should be killed. Bilti la'Hashem levado. You can only sacrifice to Hashem. All right, so this is a fairly standard prohibition against idolatry. And the Torah says that if someone sacrifices to these Elohim, these false gods, so then they get killed. Now, who are we referring to in this prohibition? So the Ibn Ezra says, you know what, we can't be referring to Jews. We're not talking about a Jew who does idolatry. Because we already said that a Jew is prohibited to do idolatry in the 10 Commandments, right? That was last week's Parsha. We already said in the 10 Commandments that you're not allowed to do idolatry, a Jew. So we don't need to repeat that prohibition. We know that Jews are prohibited to do idolatry. So who is the Torah referring to when it says that you're not allowed to do idolatry in this week's Parsha? Must be that it's referring to non-Jews. Okay, so this is what we said is a ger toshav, right? It's saying that if a non-Jew wants to live in the land of Israel, then they cannot do idolatry, otherwise they're going to be killed. And says the Ibn Ezra, you know what my proof for this is? Because the Torah just prohibited bestiality, all right, relations with an animal. Now, why would in verse 18? Now, Jews, the Ibn Ezra says that's not the way we do things. All right, so you don't really need to prohibit Jews to do that. Obviously, it's prohibited for Jews, but Jews don't really do that kind of thing, anyways. So, who is the Torah saying that it's prohibited to have relations with an animal? It's referring to non-Jews. So, the Torah is giving us the 2 rules for being a ger toshav, okay, which according to the Ibn Ezra are that a non-Jew who wants to live in Israel, they're allowed to live in Israel, right? Israel does not discriminate. They do not stop non-Jews from living in Israel, even back in the Torah's days. But they have to agree to 2 things. They have to agree not to worship idolatry and not to have relations with animals. Okay, once they agree to those 2 things, so now they're a ger toshav. So the Torah in verse 18 and verse 19 is describing how someone becomes a ger toshav, and those are the 2 conditions to live in Israel: that they not have relations with animals and they not worship idolatry. Okay. Now, the Ramban and Rav Sadia Gaon, so they disagree with Ibn Ezra about this. And they say, no, the Torah is prohibiting idolatry for Jews. It's not prohibiting it for non-Jews. It's talking about Jews. Now, what about the problem that the Torah already prohibited idolatry in last week in the 10 Commandments? So the Ramban says very simple, we always find this in the Torah. The Torah always prohibits things, and then it repeats it, and it tells us what the punishment is. So everything is basically repeated twice. First, it tells us that such and such is prohibited, and then it tells us that this is the punishment. So the same thing is true here. Last week, the Torah prohibited idolatry for Jews. And in this week's Parsha, it prohibits Jews from, it says that if a Jew worships idolatry, then they get killed. That's the punishment. Okay, but it's talking about Jews. So basically, we have a debate over here. According to the Ibn Ezra, the pasuk is referring to the prohibition of idolatry refers to a non-Jew doing idolatry, whereas according to the Ramban, the prohibition of idolatry refers to a Jew doing idolatry. Now, the interesting thing about this pasuk is that it says, Zoveach la Elohim yechra. Someone who worships Elohim will be killed. But it doesn't say which which God. It doesn't identify which God are we talking about. So Rashi points out, okay, and Ibn Ezra also points this out, that it doesn't say Zoveach li Elohim, right? Li Elohim would mean to God, in which case you'd need to identify, are we talking about the real God or the false gods? But that's not what it says. It says la Elohim, to the gods. So that means, right, it's like in Hebrew when you have a hey. So it's the definite article. So this word, la Elohim, is like saying to the gods. So according to Rashi, so now Rashi explains why doesn't it have to tell us which gods we're talking about? So Rashi says, because we're talking about the gods that we already referenced in last week's Parsha. Right? In other words, it's the same false gods that were referenced in the 10 Commandments. The Torah already told us that these gods you're prohibited to worship. So that's why it doesn't need to repeat which gods we're talking about. We know which gods we're talking about. Those gods that we were talking about in the 10 Commandments. Okay, so who does Rashi agree with? So Rashi basically agrees with the Ramban that this is a repeat of the same prohibition as last week. Right? Last week it said that the Jews cannot worship idolatry. And this week the Torah is repeating, you cannot worship those gods. It's repeating the same thing again, referring again to Jews not being allowed to do idolatry. Otherwise they get the death penalty. Okay? That's how Rashi and the Ramban and Rav Sadia go and read it. The Ibn Ezra, so again, right, he understands that Pasuk 19 is talking about a non-Jew worshiping idolatry. So the Ibn Ezra says that, you know why it doesn't tell us which gods it's talking about? Because it means the God that this Ger Toshav used to worship. Right? In other words, this guy was a Ger Toshav, so he used to be an idolater, and now he accepted not to worship gods anymore. So that's why it doesn't need to tell us which gods we're talking about. We know which gods we're talking about. The gods that this guy used to worship in his previous life. So those gods he's not allowed to worship now that he's a Ger Toshav. So that's why it doesn't need to identify which ones. Okay? All right. So let's move on from Pasuk 19. But basically, right, we've just seen a good number of points in Pasuk 19 that are part of this overall debate. According to the Ibn Ezra, Pasuk 19 is saying that a non-Jew is prohibited to do idolatry. According to Rashi and the Ramban, Pasuk 19 is saying that a Jew is prohibited to do idolatry. All right, and we've gone through 2 or 3 points within that pasuk in terms of each of their interpretations. Okay, so now we come to pasuk 20. Pasuk 20 says, "Ger lo sona v'lo sechaltzenu." You shouldn't oppress a ger, and you shouldn't bother him, and you shouldn't oppress him. So Rashi explains that this means that you shouldn't bother him verbally. Okay, you shouldn't insult him, and you shouldn't oppress him financially. You shouldn't steal from him. Okay, so that's how Rashi. That's the 2 things that are prohibited in this pasuk. That you're not allowed to oppress a ger either verbally, you shouldn't insult him, or you shouldn't take his money. So now we understand, right? Let's come back to our original debate. The Ibn Ezra understands that this is talking about a ger toshav. Why does he say that? So on a very simple level, we now understand, because according to the Ibn Ezra, the whole unit of psukim is talking about a ger toshav, right? That's the whole context of what the Torah is saying over here. Meaning pasuk 18 and pasuk 19, we're both talking about how someone becomes a ger toshav. So now pasuk 20 says that once someone becomes a ger toshav, you shouldn't oppress him verbally, right? You shouldn't belittle him. You shouldn't demean him. So according to the Ibn Ezra, now we understand why this pasuk is, he understands it referring to even a ger toshav, even someone who hasn't converted fully. On the other hand, the Sefer Achinuch, so he understands that pasuk 20 is referring to a full-fledged convert, a full-fledged ger. And the reason is because he probably understands, like Rashi and the Ramban, that the Torah has been talking to Jews up until now. So presumably it's still talking about Jews, and this pasuk is talking about someone who's converted to Judaism. Okay. Now let's continue. Let's see how they interpret the next few words over here. So the Torah says, why shouldn't you oppress a convert? Ki gerim hayisem be'eretz Mitzrayim, because you yourselves were converts. You were foreigners in Egypt. Okay, you yourselves were foreigners in Egypt. So basically, every Jew, no matter who they are, no matter how stable and settled they are in Israel, every Jew at one point comes from foreigners, right? We were all foreigners in the land of Egypt. That's what the Torah says. Now, what exactly does this mean? So Rashi explains that it means the following: that let's say you say to someone, right? Let's say a Jew says to a convert, you don't come from a Jewish family. You are a convert, right? Your lineage is lowly. So the convert will turn right back to the Jew who insulted them and say, you also come from converts, right? You think you're such hot stuff because your parents were Jews and your grandparents were Jews, but way back, you also come from converts. So basically, according to Rashi, the Torah is saying that there's no way to demean a convert by calling them a convert, because that convert, if they're smart, will just turn around and remind every Jew that they also come from converts, right? They also come from people who were foreigners at one point in the land of Egypt. All right, and then more than that, they were foreigners, right? But they were also the Jews all converted, right? In other words, we came from people who were not Jews, and we all are converts on some level, right? It might have been many generations ago, but they were all converts on some level. So that's how Rashi interprets what the Torah is saying. The Ibn Ezra interprets that what the Torah is saying, that we were all foreigners in Egypt, is that we shouldn't belittle a convert, a foreigner, because we were all foreigners at some point. All right. In other words, we should remember, right? Not necessarily that the person's going to remind us, but we should remember on our own that we were all converts in Egypt at one point. Now, before we go on, so this builds on their debate so far. According to the Ibn Ezra, we're not talking about a convert to Judaism. We're talking about a ger toshav, a foreigner who's living in the land of Israel. So that's why the Ibn Ezra says that he's not going to say that the Jews were also converts. He's going to say you were foreigners when you lived in Egypt way back, right? So that's in response to what a person who points out to a foreigner that they're in a land that they don't come from, that they're not native to. On the other hand, Rashi, who interprets this whole unit as talking about a Jewish convert, a full-fledged convert, right, that you shouldn't put down a full-fledged convert by reminding them of their past. So Rashi understands that the issue, so to speak, is that all of us come from converts. All of us back in the day, our ancestors converted to Judaism. All right, so it's very interesting to see how their debate continues in this second half of the pasuk. Okay, now let me just finish this up. The Ramban has a beautiful explanation of this end of the pasuk. All right, that we were all converts, we were all foreigners in Egypt, and the Ramban says the following. He says that why would someone oppress a convert? Okay, why would someone oppress a convert? So the reason, says the Ramban, is because they think they can get away with it, right? Who's going to stand up for the convert? The convert doesn't have family, they don't have relatives, right? That you don't want to start up with a born Jew because someone will always defend them, right? People will come to their aid. But a convert doesn't have a strong social, protection. So you could get away with it. You could put them down. You could demean them. You can steal from them, and nobody's going to come to their defense. So what Hashem is saying is, you were converts in Egypt. I'm sorry, you were foreigners in Egypt, and the Egyptians oppressed you. And they thought they could get away with it, but they didn't get away with it because I, Hashem, came to your aid. I came to save you. So in the same way, says Hashem, when you put down a convert, when you oppress them, when you steal from them, so I will come to their aid. Don't think that you can get away with it because they don't have a social safety net, right? They don't have a social background they don't have a safety net to protect them because I, Hashem, will protect them. All right. Same way I protected you in Egypt and freed you from the slavery and redeemed you. All right. So this is a very beautiful idea to explain what the Torah means to say with this. All right. So those are the three ideas in that pasuk. Don't oppress a convert because you were converts. So either it means that we all come from converts, or it means that we should remember our days as foreigners in Egypt, or it's saying that Hashem stands up for people who are alone. So like he stood up for us in Egypt, so he'll stand up for the convert. Okay, now let me just finish with the last pasuk in this unit, all right, which is pasuk 21. Pasuk 21 says, Kol almana v'yosem lo sanun, that you shouldn't oppress a widow or an orphan. And again, these are people that are weaker for whatever reason, right? Maybe they're financially less stable, or even if they're financially stable, right? They have a difficulty in life. They're sad about their loss. So you shouldn't oppress these people. And the Torah says, because if they call out to God in prayer, so it's not going to be good, right? God is going to stand up for them. So what is the point of this pasuk, right? Why does it follow after the convert? So again, right, it's a similar debate. According to the Ibn Ezra, up until now, we've been discussing not oppressing a ger toshav, right, a non-Jew who lives in Israel. So now the Torah is switching, and it's saying that the same rule applies also to a Jew that finds themselves in a difficult situation. Okay, so these are not repetitive, these two verses. Verse 20 is saying that you shouldn't oppress a ger toshav, a non-Jew. Verse 21 is now changing the story and saying that you also shouldn't oppress a weak Jew. Okay, so that's the way the Ibn Ezra reads it. The Ramban, on the other hand, right, who understands, or let's say he understands this differently, right? Let's say if you understand that verse 20 was also talking about a Jew, right, a full-fledged Jew, a full convert, a ger. So what the Torah is saying is that it's the same thing. They're both Jews, but they're different types of weakness in society, right? A convert is weak because they don't have a strong social safety net, because they're foreigners, right? They're new to the system. They don't have relatives. A widow and an orphan is weak because they don't have, let's say, a man. They don't have someone running the house. They don't have someone to stand up for them. But it's a different form of weakness. But the Torah is saying the same thing, that God, again, will be their protector. He'll stand up for them. All right. So, okay. So that's the basic. That's what I wanted to go through. Again, the interesting thing here is to see how the Ibn Ezra very consistently reads all these psukim as one unit, that it's talking about a ger toshav, right, and how he fits together all of this. And then on a practical level, he claims that the prohibition of oppressing a ger applies even to a ger toshav, even to someone that hasn't converted to Judaism, someone that's living in Israel and following some of the rules. So they would also have this prohibition, as opposed to the Sefer Chinuch and others who limit this prohibition to a full-fledged convert. All right. Thank you again, everyone.